It's shiny boy season, which also means it's annoying people season. And as a fellow annoying person myself, here are my 2 cents regarding this year's Best Picture nominees. The 96 Academy Awards are on the doorstep as I am making this video. I am really late to this, but since I'm kinda proud of myself for watching all 10 Best Picture nominees this year, I need to talk about it. First, I want to preface this by saying, what a year for cinema. I spent a record amount of money at the cinema. I was really excited for every single movie and didn't even manage to see all of the ones I wanted to see. In this video, I want to talk about my thoughts about each movie individually. I also want to take a guess on what movie I think will win this year. I'll try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. I won't discuss endings or plot twists, but mild spoilers are certainly ahead, so keep that in mind. Number 10. Poor Things. Listen, as a mentally ill girly myself, going into Poor Things, I thought I'd really love it. But yeah, I didn't. And I could talk for hours about why I didn't vibe with this film, and you'd be really tired or annoyed because you're probably convinced it has a lot to say and is even better at female emancipation than Barbie, and that's fine. But I personally think it isn't. I will give it the benefit of the doubt and say it was simply clunky at delivering its messages, which obviously it tried to. This was a political movie and no one can convince me otherwise. So I won't assume that this was really meant as predatory of a film as I have perceived it. First of all, I wholeheartedly agree with anyone who says this style of this movie is amazing. It is gorgeous, it has a really distinctive look, the costumes are beautiful and the performances amazing. Visually, chef's kiss. But the beautiful packaging won't gaslight me into thinking that the themes were well executed. This film kinda made me want to take a deep shower. And I'm certainly not a prude, I don't mind sex scenes, even if there are about 10 in this film. It's fine, but thematically this felt wrong on so many levels. This movie kinda reminded me of Saltburn. A visually enticing piece that obviously tried to tackle complex themes as, well, I don't actually know what its themes were. Was it a class thing? Because Lord, what was I supposed to take out of it? Don't trust the upper middle class? But I digress. While this movie had some great scenes covering manipulation and an obviously abusive man, this was not as empowering as it presented itself as. The implications of this actually kinda scare me. Do I really have to be a hypersexual woman who isn't impacted by what is obvious sexual abuse by several men around me in order to be empowered? That's not how a woman's psyche works. We are not robots. Abuse leaves scars even when the revelations come later after you grew out of the mind of a clearly underage person. Children need to be protected over the threshold of figuring out their sexuality, even if your body looks grown up and sexy and not underage at all, so it's fine. The men around Bella ultimately failed her in any way, and in the end, some of them even get rewarded for it. The more I think about this movie, the angrier I get. And don't you dare compare it to Frankenstein. Anyway, let's continue. Number 9. Maestro. Yeah, we all figured out this might happen, didn't we? Well, Maestro is an objectively good and solid movie. It is the life story of Leonard Bernstein, the first American conductor, who you might be familiar with if you're familiar with the West Side Story musical. Well, I most certainly wasn't, because I am not really into musicals. Also, I know nothing about classical music, so these were my problems with Maestro to begin with. Besides that, it is a biopic, and in this day and age of biopic oversaturation, these movies have to really be good in order to justify their existence, in my opinion. Hollywood is filled up to the brim with these kind of movies, and there seems to be not a single year where there is not at least one nominated for Best Picture. And Maestro unfortunately does feel like a movie designed to perform well with the Academy. Taking a deeper look, it is not really groundbreaking in any way. But what added to my indifference towards this movie is simply that it obviously wasn't made for me. I think this movie was made for people who love music and love the craft and the dedication, who know Bernstein and his work, which just never actively found its way into my ears and mind. Even though I like talk quite a bit, because I feel like that movie narratively stands on its own. I want to say again that this is a solid movie. It looks great, the characters look great. Bradley Cooper, despite falling out of favor with some, did a good job, and Carey Mulligan was brilliant as expected. Even though I have to say that after watching this movie, I don't feel like I've really learned anything deep about Leonard Bernstein or conducting or music in general. Personally, this movie just didn't give me much. It was just kind of depressing actually, so unfortunately I have to put it second to last. Honestly, I had rather seen a different movie in this nomination spot, like for example The Iron Claw, that has obviously been snubbed. The following movies are movies that I really enjoyed, so this is already the biggest gap in the whole video. Number 8, Barbie. Yeah, next is Barbie already. Look, I'm a big Greta Gerwig fan. Little Women is one of my favorite movies of all time. Gerwig is fantastic at telling stories about the female experience. She did it countless times before, but I found Barbie specifically to be a bit off. And don't get me wrong, it is a great movie. This is me being really spoiled by Greta. The first half of Barbie kinda slaps. I was sat in the cinema, dressed in pink with my film club, ready to be entertained, and I had an overall great time. It is very nice to look at thanks to the fantastic production design with an iconic soundtrack. I don't have to tell you that Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling absolutely slay as Barbie and Ken. They are the perfect casting choice. I forgot how hilarious Ryan Gosling is until I found myself really enjoying his comedic line delivery. And Margot Robbie really has it all. She can convey the most distinct emotions very effectively. My problems start with the pacing, and in my opinion, it becomes visible in the second act. There's too much going on, too much to tackle, too much metal. And then in the third act, it kind of falls apart for me until the very end, where it kind of grabs me again. The Kens taking over Barbie Land is hilarious. However, the whole mission to stop them feels weird and kind of dumbed down and flat. Despite America Ferrera's monologue being important and certainly well delivered, I personally feel like I have heard this female rage moment being written even better and more effectively included within a narrative at least a few times before. I ultimately think this movie wanted to be too much. I personally wish there had been more focus on either the whole societal expectations women have to face or the mother-daughter narrative. Greta has portrayed how complex mother-daughter relationships are way more effectively in the past, most notably with Lady Bird. This story felt almost cheap in comparison, but nonetheless, I had a great time with this. I particularly liked the last scene starting from the "what was I made of" part and even shed a tear or two. And this line fucking slaps. Number 7, American Fiction. This movie is about the character Monk, played by Jeffrey Wright. Whilst his novels receive academic praise, they sell poorly, and publishers even reject his latest manuscript for not being black enough. Frustrated by that and by serious setbacks in his personal life, he writes a manuscript. A book that covers all stereotypes and cliches in black writing that he can think of. It turns out it's this very book that gets him a very lucrative deal with a publisher. American Fiction is witty and sharp in its tone and pacing. Through Monk's cynical ways, the movie effectively shows the shallow consumerism that hides under supposed political awareness. But the movie also doesn't shy away from making use of what I feel like caricatured side characters. The message of this movie is an important one. It makes you think, especially as a white person, what kind of consumption is based on real care for a cause, and what am I consuming out of sensation mongering? What does it really mean to listen to a voice instead of voicing out for others, respectively? I like this movie, while I don't think it is perfect. In my opinion, it could have dived even deeper into its themes. For example, I thought the conversation towards the end between Monk and his fellow writer Santara, who he agrees on quite a bit, despite the both of them having similar core values, could have went on a bit more. The conversation just started to get interesting in my opinion. But anyways, I'm glad I got to watch this movie. It was both entertaining and thought-provoking. Number 6, Killers of the Flower Moon. Scorsese's latest movie is set in 1920s Oklahoma and stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Lily Gladstone. It's about a murder series towards members of the indigenous Osage Nation, who had recently discovered oil on their lands and thus had become really wealthy. This movie comes in with a whopping 3.5 hours, so you have to really commit to it, and I must say I don't think that a runtime this long was necessary for the story. After all, longer is not always better, and with more than 3 hours I feel like a movie has to have a special justification for taking so long. If you think about it, this movie is longer than 12 Years a Slave, a film that takes an hour less but doesn't feel any less in the slightest. Hell, this movie is even longer than Schindler's List. I think Killers of the Flower Moon is an absolutely important story to be told, and it should be told time and time again. It's ultimately a story about greed, for money and for land, and with Ernest, who is played by Leonardo DiCaprio, how easy it is to be persuaded into putting these things before everything else, and even into betraying the ones that you love. It effectively conveys the ruthlessness and violence that arises from colonizers' absolute entitlement. It's a narrative that is symptomatic for the Native American people as a whole. Instead of a whodunit mystery, however, they decided to tell a story from the perspective of the perpetrators. This is certainly an interesting idea and can make for a more intricate character study. But in this case, it also leads to the loss of mystery. I also think having white FBI people depicted as the savior in the end didn't really do the story justice. Visually, this movie is neither flashy nor really artsy. It's actually quite somber, whilst at the same time obviously not holding back and showing blood and death. This is a Scorsese film after all. On an artistic level, I feel like this movie doesn't want to make too many experiments, which I guess is fine considering the delicate themes. Leo is strong as always, but nothing revolutionary with him. Lily Gladstone, however, absolutely carries. Her performance is heartbreaking, her character Molly being reduced to a chess piece in the power plays of the white people around her. She nails the sorrow and setbacks that Molly has to go through. Her classmates really knew it back then. She's an absolute talent. Number 5. The zone of interest. Raising your children, growing your flowers and vegetables that you are really proud of, inviting your family to spend a hot summer's day in your garden pool. In the background, shots, screams, the absolute evil. Death is all around this family trying to live its best life. That's the zone of interest for you, chilling to the core. A piece to make you think, how can humans possibly live their lives this unfazed, despite being so adjacent to the absolute horror they've created. Needless to say, this movie's brilliant. Its editing is quite artsy. Scenes go for very long, making you always shift around in your seat trying to think of what comes next. The soundtrack and music editing is probably the most chilling I've ever heard in a movie. It made me scrunch my face in horror for a good chunk. Is Mika Levi alright, by the way? Because what the hell was that? There's not a lot more to say on my part. Watch this movie yourself. The acting is great, the performances are great. Sandra, darling, I love you even though you're really scary in this. The movie doesn't explain much more than the bare minimum to function. It's really a vibe. It shows rather than to tell. There's a lot to take out of it. It is a perspective on one of the darkest chapters in human history that we haven't really seen like this before. Watch this film in German if you can. It is really good, even if you will go out of it feeling like this. Number 4. Past lives. Do you sometimes wonder where your life would be if you chose or stayed with a different person? And it feels like a ghost of the past, kind of like an alternative life or like a past life. Sorry for this soppy introduction, but Past Lives is the kind of movie that leaves you in a soppy mood, but in a good way. This movie is about a woman, Nora or Nayeon, who reconnects with a man that she used to spend parts of her childhood with back in Korea. They used to be this kind of friends that people would call soulmates, but their lives drifted apart as Nora had to leave Korea for the United States with her family. Years later, she's set in New York and in a relationship with a man she met in writing school when her friend of old, Hae-sung, reconnects with her and even comes to visit. I really enjoyed this film. It takes its time showing you deep, complex characters, their life journeys, sometimes how they're interconnected, and also how they drifted apart from each other. Everyone in this movie does a really great job. The performances and dialogues are full of emotion. You can really feel the characters struggling with the choices that are presented to them. Past Lives is a movie about what could have been, and the complex thoughts that come with that are beautifully explored. The ending and the last scene in particular really got me. This is Celine Song's directorial debut, which is incredible. I'm looking forward to seeing more great things from her. Greta Lee and Tae Hugh are fantastic and full of chemistry. The narrative overall has a really nice pacing to it, and the script is pretty well written. This just leaves me to say, go watch the movie if you haven't already seen it. Now we go into the area of my 5-star rated movies. Ranking these 3 movies was pretty hard for me since they're actually unbelievably close to each other. Starting my top 3, we've got number 3, The Holdovers. The Holdovers is the kind of movie where you sort of know what you're going into. Out of the few trailers I've watched for these films beforehand, this one really was the most straightforward. The trailer put a few things onto the agenda, namely 70s New England boarding school setting, found family, grumpy old guy redemption story, crying, and Dominic Sessa, who looks really promising in this acting debut of his. And well, that's what you get with The Holdovers. And don't get me wrong, this movie is everything you want from a comfort movie. It is set in 1970, 71 and commits to a specific retro vibe, starting from studio logos in the very beginning. No Instagram faces, just vibes. This film is oozing with charm. Most of this is coming straight from the fantastic cast. Paul Giamatti absolutely embodies this grumpy old teacher figure that is mostly disliked by his students due to a strict and disagreeable nature that starts to grow softer with time. And I have to admit, his lines really stuck with me several times. Dominic Sessa is full of life. He brings a lot to the role of 15-year-old Angus Tully, a so-called holdover. He has to stay on school campus over the holidays due to his mother and her new husband not wanting him around. Angus is an interesting character. He can be kinda cocky and impatient, but most of all he's pretty stubborn, which can lead to disobedient behavior that even had him expelled from schools before. This is kind of the last chance for him to get his life into the right lane. Being left behind as the only student without anywhere to go is really testing him, and there's a lot of tension between him and his teacher, who seems to be just another person that doesn't care about him. You see, he's actually a pretty good person. He's kind-hearted to the people around him. He warms up fast to Mary, the cafeteria manager who recently lost her son in the war. Mary is played by the brilliant Divine Joy Randolph. She is really the heart of the story. I love these three together. Thematically, this film is about lonely souls that life seems to have left behind. It's the kind of bittersweet story that dwells in a sorrow that makes you feel seen, but also feel hope that there's this kind of familiar love waiting for each of us that isn't restricted to actual family. The Holdovers feels like a long hug after a tough day. I cannot wait to watch this film this Christmas and then possibly every Christmas afterwards. It's the kind of movie that makes you feel it all. This movie is why I love cinema. Number 2. Oppenheimer. Imagine, it is your very technology that goes to end about 200,000 lives in one country alone. You are quite the war hero though. After all, the bombings ended the war, but it took all these lives. How could you possibly move on with this guilt? This is a biopic about Robert J. Oppenheimer and the construction of the atomic bomb during World War II. And I love this movie. I can't possibly stress enough how overdue Cillian Murphy starring in a Christopher Nolan movie was. And my man Chris knew that himself. With this, however, the wait was worth it. Cillian was made for this role. With Oppenheimer, he was able to show what he's got in terms of acting. All the recognition he already received is more than deserving. Oppenheimer is 3 hours long and probably quite the scare for people with long movie fear. But for people who like Nolan's lengthy films and stories about historical figures, this is quite the movie for you. Personally, I do really enjoy long and slow movies, if they are good of course and interesting. You can really delve into these worlds that are presented to you, and with Oppenheimer it's exactly that for me. I was sat in that cinema taking it all in, eating up what Nolan served to me. And now to the cast. Emily Blunt was amazing and she can do no wrong. Robert Downey Jr. was brilliant. Over all these years of Marvel, I almost forgot really how good of an actor he actually is. I loved Florence Pugh, but her character felt a bit underdeveloped, but I can't exactly wrap my head around what went wrong. I also wish that the actual devastation of the bombs was shown more in the movie. Even in Oppenheimer's subjective narrative of realizing what his creation had done, they could have shown more of the actual devastation it left in Japan. Remember how I said that Maestro didn't feel like it was made for me? Well, this movie absolutely feels like it was. You could say that, yeah, this is also just another biopic, but it feels like the Oppenheimer story had more to say, enough to say to justify its existence. And don't get me started on the score. Ludwig Göransson is an absolute genius and should definitely and will most likely win the Oscar for Best Original Score. Just one more note, in case you haven't seen Oppenheimer yet, take care of your ears. If you happen to have sad little autistic ears like I do, bring some ear protection for the Trinity test specifically. My poor ears suffered a lot and I didn't even watch the movie in IMAX. This TikTok encapsulated my experience perfectly, by the way.
4, 3,
God.
2,
Here it comes.
1.
Oh, that's actually really cool. You know, maybe when they said you would feel the explosion, it was like a metaphorical thing.
Number 1. Anatomy of a Fall. Anatomy of a Fall was nothing short of brilliant. This movie, directed by Justine Triet, is about a woman whose husband had died falling out of the window under curious circumstances. It is well written, well paced, interesting, and a well directed piece of film. And it's my favorite film of the year. And I was not at all persuaded by the hot French defense attorney. This movie is a courthouse drama, a murder mystery, and most of all, an incredibly convincing character study. But I don't want to take away too much, because the details really unfold during the film. And by the way, are French courts always this dramatic and poetic? They be reading books and doing interpretations. There are certainly a few authors that come to my mind that I'd love to see in court. Colin Hoover, when will you pay for your crimes? Now let's talk about our beautiful main character, played by none other than Sandra Hüller, the girl of the hours. Your Honor, if girlbossing is really a crime, then consider me guilty. Her monologue that probably got her the nomination in the end, you complain about the life you chose, you're not the victim.
You complain about the life that you chose. You're not a victim. Not at all.
I want to get it tattooed on my forehead. As a fellow German with a German accent, I really enjoyed her performance on a profound level. Which means something, because a bad Denglish can be really off-putting for us.
And now he bring the World Cup 2006 to Germany. No, he understand us. He speak our language, language from the players.
But Sandra Hüller has it all. This woman is born to be an actor. Her performance feels so natural and seamless, which was also due to a really realistic and well-written script. This movie also has brilliant camera work, by the way, and there's very little background music to enhance the dialogues, despite music playing a huge role in the narrative. It also had a good boy in it, and, as Patrick put it, some really good knitwear. Go watch it, and watch it in French/English with German accent, please. You won't regret it. So, that's it. What a year for cinema. I'm overall pretty content with the nominations, not only in the Best Picture category. My pick for Best Picture is Oppenheimer. I feel like Cillian might win Best Actor as well, and Lily Gladstone Best Actress. If you have any thoughts on these movies you'd like to share, feel free to do so in the comments. But for now, thank you for watching.